They wanted an exclusive neighborhood, so they installed a gate without consulting anyone. But when an elderly man needed medical attention and the ambulance got stuck outside, my aunt personally showed up with her team and knocked everything down without mercy. If I have learned anything after years of living in this neighborhood, it's that giving power to idiots always ends badly. And the HOA here was living proof of that. These people had nothing to do, so they spent their days inventing stupid new rules to turn a normal neighborhood into some kind of bankrupt luxury condominium. Only this time, they went over the top. They installed a giant electronic gate at the neighborhood's only entrance and exit. No meeting, no vote, no warning. I left home to go to work, and when I came back at the end of the day, I found an iron wall blocking off the street. The first thing I thought was, this has got to be a joke. The second thing I thought was, it was obviously that woman's idea. She was the president of the HOA, and, if she had the power, she would probably force residents to ask permission to breathe. She's already tried to ban Christmas decorations because they detracted from the aesthetics of the neighborhood, tried to implement a curfew for teenagers, and once sent a warning to a neighbor because the color of his front door was too vibrant. Now, this creature has decided that a 3-meter-high iron gate is absolutely necessary to ensure the safety of the neighborhood. The problem? They didn't give control of the gate to anyone. No resident was given a key, remote control, or password. To get in or out, you had to call the HOA and wait for them to release access. It was ridiculous. In the first few days, the confusion began. Residents coming home from work and getting stuck outside because no one was answering the HOA's phone. Delivery drivers standing in the street, not knowing what to do. And what's worse, if a visitor wanted to enter, they needed prior authorization. In other words, if a friend wanted to visit you, you had to ask the HOA for permission first. You could see in the woman's eyes that she was feeling at the height of her power. She spent her days circling the gate like a prison guard, checking who was coming in, who was going out, and making sure no one was abusing the system. But the real disaster came 3 days later. It was early in the morning when I woke up to the sound of a siren. I looked out of the window and saw an ambulance stopped at the entrance to the neighborhood. The gate? Locked. The ambulance driver honked his horn. He tried to talk on the intercom. He called the HOA. And guess who showed up? Her. With her ridiculous clipboard and a cup of coffee in her hand. She walked slowly to the gate, as if she wasn't in the slightest hurry. The paramedic, already impatient, explained, "Ma'am, we've received an emergency call. We need to go in now." She sighed and replied in that unbearably calm voice of someone who thinks she has authority. "Do you have permission to enter?" The driver blinked a few times, trying to understand if he had heard her right. "Permission? We're going to see an elderly man who may be having a heart attack. This is an emergency." She flipped through the clipboard, as if checking an important document. Unfortunately, HOA procedures require that any emergency vehicle entry be authorized in advance by a registered resident. The paramedic began to lose patience. "You want someone dying to fill out a form before being attended to?" She didn't even blink. "It's not personal, sir. We just follow the rules." What happened next was a mixture of panic and outrage. The elderly man's family came running, shouting for her to open the gate. Other residents came out to see what was happening. She just stood there, doing nothing. I'd love to help, but if I open the gate without prior authorization, I'm violating HOA rules. It was at that moment that one of the neighbors had the best idea possible. He took out his cell phone and called my aunt. And why was that genius? Because my aunt wasn't just any resident. She was the town's fire chief. And when she got the call that an HOA was blocking an ambulance, she immediately lost her temper. Over the radio, she summoned a fire truck and ordered them to the scene immediately. And she didn't stop there. She also called the police. Because, in case this woman didn't know, blocking an emergency service is a crime. Less than 5 minutes later, sirens began to echo through the neighborhood. The neighbors looked out onto the street as if they were about to watch the best show of the year. The fire department arrived first. My aunt got out of the car like a hurricane about to destroy everything. She looked at the stuck ambulance, then at the locked gate, and then slowly turned to the woman, who now no longer looked so confident. My aunt crossed her arms and said, "Open it now." The woman shivered, because she realized that her power play was about to end. My aunt didn't have to shout. She didn't need to threaten. Just the way she stood there, with her arms crossed and the look on her face, was enough to turn the woman into a walking block of ice. But even though she could see that things were about to fall apart for her, the creature still tried to be authoritative. "I can't just open the gate without following HOA protocol," she said, clutching her clipboard to her chest, as if it were a shield against reality. My aunt gave a little smile. Not a friendly smile. A smile that said, "You've just made the worst mistake of your life." She turned to one of the firemen standing next to her and gave a single command. "Knock it down!" The chainsaw was switched on before the woman could even protest. The sound of metal being cut echoed throughout the neighborhood. Neighbors began pouring out of their homes to watch the spectacle of the HOA's destruction. The woman's eyes widened, and she ran to try to get between the firemen and the gate. "You can't do this!" My aunt didn't even bother to answer. She just pulled out an infringement pad and started filling in papers as if she were signing the end of a tyrannical government. The paramedic, who had long since lost patience, went up to my aunt and asked, "How long until we get through?" "Less than 3 minutes." It was the first time I'd seen a fireman sawing something with a smile on his face. The woman stood there watching the gate she loved so much being reduced to scrap. And what did she do? She called the police. Yes, she picked up the phone and called the officers as if she were the great victim of the situation. But her problem: my aunt had already called the police. So, when the police cars arrived, the officers got out knowing exactly what was going on. The woman ran up to one of the officers, pointing frantically at the firemen and my aunt. "They're destroying private property. This is vandalism. I want them all arrested." The policeman looked at her, looked at my aunt, looked at the ambulance that was still waiting to get in, and then back at the woman. "Madam, are you aware that you are obstructing an emergency service?" Her face went white. "Minus. I was just following the rules." The policeman sighed, shook his head, and looked at my aunt. "You can finish the job." And with that, the fireman took down the gate for good. The ambulance finally made it inside and headed straight for the old man's house, who, luckily, was still alive. But my aunt wasn't finished yet. She picked up the notebook, took a deep breath, and began to speak. "Well, let's go." She tore off the first sheet and handed it to the policeman. "Obstruction of emergency service." The second sheet was filled in and torn out. "Installation of barrier without municipal permission." One more. "Endangering the life of a citizen." The woman looked like she was going to faint right there. But my aunt hadn't finished yet. She took out her cell phone calculator and started adding up the amounts of the infractions. With each number she typed in, the woman's face grew paler. The neighbors began to approach, curious to know what the big verdict would be. My aunt finished the bill, looked up, and fired the final blow. $500,000. The woman stumbled back. "What? $500,000? My aunt smiled. "And since you're the president of the HOA, the financial responsibility falls squarely on the association." The whole neighborhood erupted in murmurs. $500,000 in fines. The HOA board members, who until that moment had been hiding indoors, began to appear, trying to understand the size of the disaster. One of them, a gentleman who seemed to have been forced to be part of this mess, took the fine from my aunt's hands and remained completely silent. Another, who seemed to be the treasurer, muttered, "We don't have that kind of money." My aunt just smiled and said, "You have 30 days to pay." The woman opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. She could no longer speak. The gate was destroyed. The ambulance had already passed. And now, the HOA owed the city an absurd amount of money. The best part? The HOA's phone started ringing non-stop. The neighbors, who had been fed up with these ridiculous rules for years, were now calling to demand an explanation. And I knew it wasn't over yet. She was going to try everything to get out of it, and I was going to be there to watch every attempt fail miserably. The woman vanished from the scene faster than a politician in scandal season. After picking up the ticket with trembling hands, she turned her back and ran home as if she could still escape reality. But her problem was that reality cost $500,000. The neighbors were ecstatic. It was as if we had just watched a perfect episode of a reality show about revenge against the HOA. An elderly woman took a sip of her tea and casually commented, "That was better than any soap opera I've ever seen." And I completely agreed. But I knew the woman wasn't going to accept this defeat so easily. The next day, her first desperate move came. The residents received an email with the headline, "Urgent, community contribution needed." It was a long text full of formal words trying to disguise the obvious. The HOA was broke and wanted the residents to pay the fine. The justification was pathetic. The HOA is facing an unexpected financial problem. Translation, they committed the biggest blunder in history. In order to ensure that the safety of the community remains intact. Translation, we screwed up and now you have to make do. We needed to help with donations. The suggested amount? $2,500 per household. Yes, they wanted each resident to pay $2,500 to cover their mistake. The reaction from the neighborhood? It was quite a show. The neighborhood messaging group exploded with collective indignation. $2,500? Does this woman think we're the central bank? They want us to pay for her idiocy? I'd rather spend that money buying a pet alligator and releasing it at HOA headquarters. In less than an hour, a group of residents was already organizing a petition to get rid of the HOA for good. But the woman? She didn't give up. When she realized that no one was going to pay voluntarily, she activated full dictator mode. The next day, fines started showing up at residents' homes. Yes, she tried to get money out of them by force. The infractions were ridiculous. Grass too high. It's winter, you lunatic. Everything's dry. Mailbox out of alignment. As if anyone cared. Color of blinds doesn't match. What the hell does that mean? You could see that she was desperately trying to recoup the fine money by applying made-up penalties. But her problem. No one took the HOA seriously anymore. After the gate fiasco, after blocking an ambulance and being publicly humiliated by the fire department, no one was afraid of her rules anymore. And that's when we discovered something even worse. A group of neighbors, led by a lawyer who had lived there for years, decided to review the HOA's financial documents. And what did they find? The HOA was bankrupt even before the $500,000 fine. Yes, the money that the residents paid every month had already been spent on nonsense. Expensive community events that nobody asked for. A private security service that never showed up for work. A landscaping project that cost a fortune and resulted in 3 dry bushes at the entrance to the neighborhood. Now, with an even bigger debt, the HOA was officially in the hole. And the residents? They had reached their limit. The HOA board was forced to call an urgent meeting to try to calm the neighborhood. And, for the first time, the woman appeared in public after the fiasco. She got up on the small makeshift stage in the community center, grabbed the microphone and tried to sound professional. We are aware of the residents' concerns and are working on a fair solution for everyone. The audience didn't buy it. Fair? You want us to pay for your stupidity. The fair solution would be for you to pick up your bags and leave. She huffed, trying to keep her composure. If everyone contributes, we can get out of this situation together. Someone in the background shouted, "I'd rather the HOA went bankrupt." What happened next was the definitive revolt against the HOA. The residents started organizing to dissolve the association completely. And in the midst of this confusion, the woman realized that her career as a dictator was numbered. She wasn't going to get out of this without a fight. But I knew that, in the end, she was going to lose. And I couldn't wait to see the last act of this comic tragedy. The HOA was hanging by a thread. And the woman knew it. She tried to manipulate the residents with cheap talk about community safety, tried to get money out of them with made-up fees, and even tried to scare people with false threats of eviction. But after the gate fiasco, no one was buying her bullshit anymore. The residents revolted for good. The petition to dissolve the HOA started gaining signatures faster than good gossip spreads in a group of neighbors. Within 2 days, 75% of the residents had signed. And the woman? She was losing control, and she knew it. Over the next few days, she tried desperately to get people to give up on the petition. First, she sent an email to all the residents saying that dissolving the HOA would cause the value of the houses to drop dramatically. The neighbors' response? I'd rather sell my house for half the price than keep paying dues to this joke of an association. Then she tried psychological terror. She sent out letters warning that, without the HOA, the neighborhood would be thrown into chaos. Without regulation, anyone will be able to paint their houses bright colors and turn their backyards into garbage dumps. The residents laughed so hard at this that one of them even replied, I'm going to paint my house neon purple just to see what you look like. Nothing she did worked. The revolt only grew, but the final blow was yet to come. In the midst of the HOA's collapse, the City Council decided to carry out a full audit of the association's accounts, and what they found was so disgusting that I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. The woman had been embezzling money from the HOA for years. It wasn't just that they were broke. She was using the residence fee to pay for personal expenses. The HOA's bank account statement revealed some very suspicious purchases. Expensive dinners at fine restaurants, airline tickets for important meetings, which conveniently coincided with a vacation in California, shopping in luxury stores. The scam was so obvious that even the other HOA board members began to distance themselves from it. The treasurer, who apparently didn't know about the scam, resigned on the spot and declared that he was horrified by the situation. When news of the embezzlement reached neighborhood groups, it was the trigger for the HOA's definitive collapse. Now, people didn't just want to dissolve the association. They wanted the woman to pay for what she had done. And that's exactly what happened. The HOA was officially dissolved. The residents managed to get enough votes to end the entity once and for all. And the woman? She was prosecuted for embezzlement. The city demanded that she return all the money she had embezzled. Her debt now exceeded $1 million. $1 million. She was evicted from her home because she couldn't pay what she owed. The neighborhood got rid of her. The HOA, the absurd fees, and the stupid rules. And the gate? Well, the residents decided that before sending its leftovers to the scrapyard, they should do something special. The following Saturday, a community barbecue was held right where the gate used to be. A large table was set up in the middle of the street. Lights were hung. Loud music, something that had previously been forbidden by the HOA, played non-stop. And at the entrance to the neighborhood, right where there used to be a ridiculous gate, one of the neighbors made a huge banner with the words, "Here lies the HOA, killed by extreme stupidity." My aunt was invited as the guest of honor. At the end of the evening, the residents gave her a thank you gift. It was a cake, and on top of the cake, a little sugar gate, broken in half. She loved it. And what about me? Well, I learned something valuable from that story. If you ever come across an HOA trying to play Empire, have a relative in the fire department. And, of course, never underestimate the power of an overturned gate and a fine of $500,000. And if you like this video, don't forget to leave a comment and a like.